For years, I believed this story that I had been told about myself, that I was just really anxious because I was smart and I wanted to do really well in school. So I overworked myself, or I was shy. So friend stuff was just difficult and overwhelming. So I internalized a lot of that, thinking that I was this shy, anxious, and then later depressed in high school person. But since learning about my autism diagnosis, I'm learning more and more every day that this feedback that my body was giving me, they weren't character flaws. They weren't deficits. This was information that my body was giving me, that my nervous system was telling me about needs that were not being met. And that shift has changed everything in my life. And I wanted to talk about this today because this was one of the topics that we covered in connection groups this week, reframing difficult behaviors through a nervous system lens. We've only had one of the 4 groups this week, and this first group this morning was just like the takeaways that we're having and learning how to reframe behaviors that we've been told, we're overly sensitive, we're difficult, we're disorganized, we're lazy. Learning how to reframe this as just our body giving us information. That's really important. It's changing so many of our lives as late diagnosed autistic adults. Another sentiment expressed in the group was, I think oftentimes autistic people are just so sensitive, and I mean that in a very empowering way. Like, we pick up on so many subtleties that oftentimes when we speak those into existence, like when we point at them, when we point them out, then we become the problem. And so many of us experience that in the workplace. We see something, we see patterns, we identify them, and then we become the bad guy for seeing something that's happening. And that has destroyed so many of our internal dialogues, us thinking that we're difficult, that we're too sensitive, that we're overthinking. And the shift that happens when we can reframe that as just information that our body's giving us, it's really changing everything. And to see people processing this today in groups, which I'll put a link in the description if you're interested in joining us. We have weekly discussion groups for late diagnosed autistic adults, and there's scholarships available. These conversations are just truly profound. So I wanted to talk about that today. I wanted to talk about, some things that I believed about myself that I no longer believe, things that I questioned that I don't question anymore, behaviors that I've completely reinterpreted, like what I take them to mean now. And we're also going to talk about how this it's not an excuse to, it's not an excuse to remove accountability from our lives, right? That's not where we're coming from. It's an opportunity to shift our perspective. And so I wanted to share this today in case it's helpful to anybody else. But first, I wanted to also share my little hugsters. So these are little weighted pillows that I like to keep in my lap when I'm working. There's different characters. This is, this one is Hugsy. And this one is Tumble. That's right, Hugsy and Tumble. Oh, they're falling. But they're little weighted pillows, and they just feel so comforting. That's another thing I've learned as a late diagnosed autistic adult, that even small accommodations can make a really big difference. And when we have something weighted, whether that's a weighted blanket or a weighted pillow, that offers a proprioceptive feedback on our body, which can be oddly very satisfying and calming. So if you're interested in checking that out for yourself, I'll put a link in the description. You can use the code HUG on the spectrum for 10% off 1, 15% off 2, 20% off 3, 25% off 4. So I wanted to share these with you. All right, so I'm going to keep Tumble over here with me, my buddy. Okay, so I mentioned I grew up kind of believing these things about myself. I really, until recently, thought I was a very shy person. Then I realized, no, I'm not shy. I just, socially, it's difficult for me, especially out in the wild, to understand how to jump into a conversation. And also I just listen a lot. I'm an observer, and I like noticing patterns and figuring things out before I become part of a conversation or kind of know how to interact socially. So when I was growing up, I thought my body was the problem, right? My hair fell out. I was anxious. I had really bad heart palpitations. I remember going to peer counseling in elementary school because I had upset someone on the playground because I just wanted space. I would hide in a shaded spot where no one could really get to me, and I wouldn't play with other kids. And so there's a lot of reasons that I thought I was the problem. Something was wrong with me. I just wasn't compassionate enough, or I was, communicating in a way that upset other people. But I slowly started to see, especially this playground example for one, like now it makes so much sense as an autistic adult looking back. When I went out on the playground, that was one of my first opportunities to like be alone and not be under fluorescent lights. My first opportunity during the day to decompress and just have space for myself. So these behaviors start to make a lot more sense. I wasn't trying to be mean or not play with someone or make them feel bad about themselves. I just really needed to regulate. So I think many of us were told these stories, and over time, you start believing them. You're lazy, or you're disorganized, or you're defiant. And oftentimes, we start to believe them. But I think when we really start to examine those behaviors as autistic adults, there's a story behind those behaviors. There's a reason why those behaviors come to the surface. Um, and I think oftentimes it's because we're not being accommodated in ways that our nervous system really needs. So instead of, and this is kind of like the question I think that can shift everything for us, the question that changes everything, instead of asking, what's wrong with me, shift it to what would support look like in this moment? What type of support do I need in this moment? And when you first start asking yourself this question, you might not know. You might not know the answer to that. And that's why it's important, to find resources that you can learn from as an autistic adult, because it's like learning a new language. And I've got resources on my website. I can link to them. Um, but when you start asking yourself the question, not what's wrong with me, but what do I need right now in this moment to feel supported? And we're going to kind of talk about what some of those shifts might be, like what some of those accommodations might be. But even just that one shift of going from what's wrong with me to what do I need, that can change everything. Okay. So whenever I notice, right, that I'm feeling dysregulated or when I'm feeling anxious, some questions that I can start asking to figure out kind of how I got to this state, like what happened before this, what was happening around me. If there's multiple conversations happening at once, that's kind of an immediately dysregulating thing to me. What was happening inside of me? So, am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Do I need to go to the bathroom? Because oftentimes, autistic people, we don't register those things until they become an emergency. Have I been masking? Do I feel like I'm being myself right now, or do I feel like I'm having to pretend? Was I overstimulated? Was there a noise that was upsetting? Was there a light that was flickering? Was there a weird smell coming from the refrigerator? Um, from my coworker's lunch, had I just been through a transition in the day, like in my schedule, because transitions can be really dysregulating and upsetting. Um, so then the behaviors stopped feeling so random and they started, autistic people, I'm going to generalize, we're often good at finding patterns. And so when you can start to even just notify, like, no, not notify, when you can start to identify or label, oh, I'm dysregulated. Oh, I'm overwhelmed. Oh, my body feels off. Even just noticing and labeling can be really powerful. So it's not that we necessarily have to change those behaviors in the moment, but just noticing, labeling, that's the first step and it's huge. And if you're in, the connection groups, a phrase that I love using a lot is it makes sense. I feel this way. Another one of those things that changes everything, y'all. It changes everything. To just validate yourself. Oh, it makes sense. I feel this way. It makes sense. I lashed out. I'm not trying to justify it, right? Like if I lashed out and I shouldn't have, I can go back and apologize. But rather than shaming myself, oh, it makes sense that I lashed out. They interrupted me when I was sharing an idea, and then 3 people started talking at the same time, right? So I lashed out, not because I'm a mean person, but because in that moment, there was a lot of input that my body didn't know how to process. So it makes sense I feel this way. So learning how to reinterpret those behaviors. I want to talk about some labels, some common labels that many of us hear as late diagnosed autistic adults, usually in childhood. So if you grew up hearing you were lazy, maybe you weren't avoiding work or responsibilities. Maybe you were just already operating at full capacity and needed to rest and recharge. Maybe you weren't too emotional. Maybe you had just lost some emotional flexibility because you were drowning in these unprocessed emotions that nobody taught you how to deal with. Maybe you weren't reacting to this moment in time. Maybe you were reacting to a whole slew of moments from that day that you hadn't had time to process or understood how to process. If you don't have space, in relationships to process your emotions and you don't know the importance of processing them and feeling them, a lot of us tend to shove our emotions down thinking that they're a problem. But again, our emotions are very important information that give us feedback around the world, about the world around us, and what we need in the moment. So if we're used to suppressing those emotions, it's going to be very confusing to figure out what we need in the moment, because those are clues. If you grew up hearing that you were difficult, maybe you weren't resisting people, maybe you were resisting overwhelm. Maybe there were demands being placed on you and you had lost autonomy. So, demand avoidance and autonomy, those are two very big concepts, important concepts for late diagnosed autistic people to become familiar with. If you grew up hearing that you were needy, maybe you weren't asking for too much. Maybe you had spent a really long time trying to survive without enough support. Maybe you were just asking for your basic needs to be met, but maybe you didn't know how to communicate what those needs were. And I think a lot of autistic adults were still there. Like we don't know what our needs are. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think how to incorporate some of that into this video because I know I mentioned we'll kind of talk about some different things we might need in the moment. So I'll do my best to remember that. My videos are unedited. We'll see if my brain can remember that. Remember to include that. If you grew up hearing that you were disorganized, maybe your brain wasn't failing. Maybe it was just overloaded. Um, so maybe the behavior wasn't the problem. Maybe it was the information that you were trying to process. And again, I'm not trying to make excuses for bad behavior. And I have another video about that, like just taking ownership and accountability. I'm not trying to gloss over things that we do that hurt other people by any means, but I'm just trying to help us contextualize why we have certain responses so that we can then choose how to follow up on that behavior, right? Does it necessitate a follow up conversation? Does it necessitate more self compassion? Does it necessitate a different approach next time? So, yeah, in this section, the difference between compassion and excuses. So, if I snap at someone, I'm going to apologize. If I miss a deadline, I'm going to take responsibility for that. We're not sweeping things under the rug. It's just that now I'm focused on the right problem, or I'm focused on a problem that has a helpful solution, right? Instead of framing myself as the problem as, oh, I'm incompetent or incapable or whatever. Oh, well, maybe I don't have enough support right now. What would support look like in this moment? And that's the issue, right? Like, let me get the right support and then I can follow through on that deadline. Then I can have that conversation that I need to have. So it's not about lowering expectations, it's just about making them more realistic and finding better ways to support yourself in the process. So let's talk about maybe what was our body actually trying to say? For years, I thought my body was working against me. Why am I so anxious all the time? A big part of that for me, it's a whole nother video. I'm realizing that I fit the profile of POTS, which is a condition that a lot of autistic people have, and it causes my heart rate to spike all the time. And so learning this distinction has helped a lot because it's not always that I'm anxious, it's that my body physiologically is having a response to heat or standing up or being dehydrated that causes me to feel really anxious. So I can reframe that. But, anyways, for years, I thought my body was working against me and preventing me from being more productive or having more friendships, whatever it might be. But now I realize that it's been working and communicating with me, communicating helpful information, working with me alongside me this whole time. That shift, again, changes everything because my body is not my enemy. It's my best, most trustworthy companion. And so many of us have been kind of conditioned to downplay our intuition because maybe somebody else benefited from us believing them over our experience. And so we lose that trust in ourselves and it causes us to downplay or not even really be able to register how we're really feeling. So maybe when I shut down, it's my body saying, I've reached my capacity. Maybe it's not failure, it's not that I can't do it. It's just that I need different support or I need a rest, I need a break before I can access that. Yeah, maybe when I can't start a task, maybe my body's just saying I don't have enough energy for this right now. If I become irritable, maybe my body's saying, hey, you've been ignoring some other needs that we need to get met before we do anything else. If I'm isolating, my body might be saying, I need some quiet time before I can reconnect with myself or anyone. If I've cried over something small, which first of all, crying is a really healthy thing, um, you know, maybe this isn't actually about today. Maybe this is a cumulative sadness or stress that I could benefit from pausing to reflect on a little bit. Oh, this is a big one. Like when I can't make any more decisions, because that happens, it's like this decision making fatigue, which executive functioning can be really difficult and challenging for autistic people. And I've got more videos on that. I'll try to remember to put a link up here. So whenever I have trouble making decisions, maybe it's because I've already made a million that day, and maybe I just need to move any decisions to the next day or after I've had some recovery time. Um, if I get to a point where I can't tolerate another sound or another conversation, maybe it's because I've been coping a lot longer than I realized. Coping without a break, coping without a snack, coping without water, coping without emotional support. So before I maybe treated these things as like character flaws, but now I hear them as really, really important communication and really like loving communication for my body. My body's not trying to sabotage me. My body is actually giving me really helpful feedback. And when I honor that feedback, it actually helps me get to where I'm going. And I've used this analogy in several videos now, but I really like the analogy of when you're driving and you get upset with someone for going slow and you zip past them. You're like, haha, I'm going faster than you. And then you end up at the same stoplight. And that's kind of, I think, the bottom line for me in this is I'm really realizing when I don't get set on like, okay, how can I be more productive? How can I push through this? How can I just keep going? If I actually take the time to slow down and process, be where I am, right? Be where your feet are. I'm actually going to get to the same point, right? And I'm probably going to be more regulated when I get there than trying to speed through everything and then being flustered and frustrated when I arrive. Um, so yeah, this reframing has been really important. And I said, we would talk about some things maybe that can help us in these moments when we're feeling overwhelmed or those labels are coming back to our heads, like we're anxious or we're being difficult or disorganized or lazy. So labeling can help. Oh, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now, or my body's feeling stressed or tight, however however you're identifying it, because sometimes we have trouble putting words to emotions. It's alexithymia. So labeling it, you can just take a few deep breaths and use a phrase like I mentioned earlier. It makes sense. I feel this way. When was the last time you had some water? Because staying hydrated is very important for staying regulated. When's the last time you had some alone time to process? That's integral for autistic adults. When's the last time you had some calories? When's the last time you stemmed? Okay, I know this is like the stereotypical one, right? But like moving your body repetitively, bouncing, flowing, rocking, um, stemming intentionally is very, very important. And I'm not just talking fidgets, um, big stems that allow your body to get energy out are so important. So those are just some basic things that can really help us regulate. But I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Like, what types of things are you learning how to reframe? What experiences from your past are you learning how to reframe that has helped you stop seeing yourself as the problem and started seeing your body and your body's feedback as really valuable information? I'd love to hear from that in the comments. And if you would like a little weighted desk buddy, like Hugsy or Tumble, feel free to check the link out in the description. Use code HUG on the Spectrum for 10% off. Thank you so much for watching. I would love it if you could give this video a thumbs up if it was helpful to you. Please be kind to yourself, and I will hopefully see you in the next video. Bye.